Keanu Reeves froze mid-step at a Hollywood gala when he saw his former nanny vanished 2 years ago, cradling a baby who looked exactly like his daughter. The woman spotted him, panicked, and ran. Now, Keanu's left holding a baby's pacifier and a terrifying question. Is this the child he never knew he had? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers, its golden walls echoing with the clink of champagne glasses and polite laughter. Waiters in black vests moved between clusters of donors and celebrities, offering canapes and refilling flutes. The night was a celebration, a high-profitable fundraiser supporting children's mental health, an event Keanu Reeves had been invited to for months, and yet, as he stood near the entrance with his hands tucked in his pockets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He smiled politely as a film executive waved at him from across the room, then looked down at his shoes. The tuxedo felt stiff, the collar itched, and the noise? It pressed into his ears like static. He wasn't used to this anymore. Not the spotlight, not the idle chatter, not the forced laughter. He had only come because the cause mattered, but part of him wished he were at home, in the quiet, where life was simple and warm. His mind wandered, as it always did these days, to his daughter. Ava was 5 now, brilliant, bold, full of questions and energy. She would be tucked in by now, her nightlight casting stars across her ceiling, probably still holding that ragged stuffed bunny she refused to sleep without. He missed her. He always did when he traveled, even just across town, especially tonight. The last time he'd attended this same event, 2 years ago, Ava had been only 3. That was also the year everything changed. The year Marisol disappeared. He hadn't let himself think about her in a long time, but standing here, surrounded by polished strangers in sequined gowns and $1,000 suits, her memory came back sharp and sudden. Marisol Vega, Ava's first real nanny, the one who sang her lullabies in Spanish, the one who stayed her lullabies in Spanish, the one who knew exactly how to braid her hair when Keanu's fingers fumbled, the one who stayed up during fevers and sat beside Ava during her first night without her mother. Marisol had become family without him realizing it. And then, one day, she was gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just a note on the kitchen counter saying she had to leave. Her mother was sick in Oaxaca. She couldn't stay. She was sorry. That was it. Ava had cried for weeks. Keanu had looked for her, but there was nothing to find. No records, no trail. She had vanished, and he hadn't stopped wondering why. He took a slow breath, trying to shake the memory, and turned toward the dessert table. There was a chocolate fountain Ava would have loved. He imagined her there, giggling at the falling stream, fingers sticky with marshmallows and strawberries. He smiled, only faintly. Then he saw her. Near the far end of the ballroom, standing by the corner of the white tablecloth-covered dessert display, a woman in a soft gray dress held a baby girl against her chest. She rocked gently, her head tilted in toward the child. Her long, dark hair was tied in a loose braid. Her posture was familiar. Keanu's heart stopped. It was Marisol. For a split second, Keanu thought he was hallucinating. Maybe he was just tired, or maybe his mind had conjured her out of longing and guilt. But then she shifted slightly, turning enough for the ballroom lights to catch her face. And there was no doubt. It was Marisol. She hadn't changed much. Her eyes still held that quiet intensity, the same eyes that had once watched over Ava with tenderness and calm. But now those eyes were shadowed with something else. Fear. She clutched the baby tighter, glancing nervously at the people around her, as if she were trying not to be seen. Keanu didn't move. He couldn't. His breath caught in his chest, and then he saw the child. The little girl in Marisol's arms couldn't have been more than 18 months old. She had soft, jet-black curls just like Marisol's, but it wasn't the hair that made Keanu's heart drop. It was the child's eyes. Wide, hazel, flecked with green and gold. They weren't just familiar, they were identical to Ava's, right down to the way they narrowed slightly when she was curious, right down to the tilt of her head. It was like looking back in time, like seeing Ava at that age all over again. Keanu's knees went weak. He stepped forward, heart pounding, brain scrambling for logic. He needed answers. He needed to speak to Marisol. He needed to understand what he was seeing. But as if she sensed him, Marisol suddenly turned her head. Their eyes met across the crowd. Her expression shifted instantly from surprise to alarm. Keanu took a step toward her, lifting a hand, unsure what to say, unsure how to say it. But he didn't get the chance. Marisol's eyes widened in panic. She clutched the baby closer to her chest and moved, fast. She turned from the table, weaving through the crowd with practiced precision, like someone who had done this before. Like someone fleeing. Keanu's voice caught in his throat. Marisol. No one around him reacted. The music was too loud. The laughter, the chatter, the endless clinking of glasses. His voice was swallowed by it all. He started walking faster, dodging between guests, murmuring apologies as he bumped shoulders. He caught sight of her again near the far corner of the room, heading toward the side exit near the emergency exit signs. The baby bounced in her arms as she quickened her pace. "Marisol, wait!" he called again, louder this time. A security guard stepped in front of him. "Sir, the press is lined up this way." "Move," Keanu said firmly, brushing past. But it was too late. Marisol was already pushing through the side door, vanishing into the dark hallway beyond. By the time he reached the door, she was gone. The hallway was empty. The sound of the party faded behind him. All that remained was a faint trace of her perfume. And something, lying on the floor. Keanu knelt slowly, his heart still racing as he reached for the small object on the tiled floor. It was a baby's pacifier, light pink, with tiny moons and stars decorating the rim. It was still warm to the touch. He turned it over in his hand, stunned by how something so small could feel so heavy. A trail of soft footprints marked the marble floor ahead, faint, hurried, already fading. The hallway split in 3 directions. Marisol could have gone anywhere. He stood there, still gripping the pacifier, trying to piece together what had just happened. He hadn't seen Marisol in 2 years. She'd vanished without warning, left Ava heartbroken and confused, and left him full of unanswered questions, and now she was back. Not just back. Here, tonight, at this very gala, holding a child that looked too much like Ava to be a coincidence. He swallowed hard. The child's face wouldn't leave his mind. The curls, the wide hazel eyes, the slight cleft in the chin. His chin. It wasn't just resemblance. It was unmistakable. He gripped the pacifier tighter. Could it be? Could that baby be his? The thought sent a chill through his chest. He didn't know what was more overwhelming, the hope or the fear. Why would Marisol hide something like that from him? If it were true, if that child was his daughter, why had she run? Behind him, the door to the ballroom creaked open. The noise rushed in again. Voices, music, a host announcing a new donation from a tech mogul. Keanu turned and walked slowly back through the doorway, slipping the pacifier into his jacket pocket. This is how it broke into his heart. The milking room, the church, the sheriff's office. He needed air. Outside, the night was cool. Palm trees swayed gently under the starlit sky. A valet offered to call his car, but Keanu waved him off and stood beneath the string lights that wrapped the front courtyard. His thoughts raced in every direction. There were too many questions and no answers. Why was Marisol at the gala? Why did she run? And who was that child? He pulled out the pacifier and stared at it again. Something about the stars and moons on it stirred a deep ache in his chest. Ava used to have one just like it. Same color, same shape, even the little constellation patterns. But Ava had grown out of hers by the time she was 2. This one was fresh. It had been used tonight. He was sure of it. The door opened behind him again. His assistant stepped out with concern on his face. "Keanu? Everything all right?" Keanu didn't look away from the sky. "I saw someone I wasn't expecting," he said quietly. "Do you need me to find them?" "No," Keanu said. "She's gone." His hand closed around the pacifier again, but not for long. He knew deep in his gut that he was going to find Marisol, and when he did, she would have to answer the one question he couldn't stop asking himself. Who is that baby? And why does she look exactly like Ava? Keanu stood in the quiet of his living room later that night, the lights dimmed, the pacifier still in his hand. Ava was asleep upstairs. He had peeked in on her before coming down, just to watch her breathe. Her little chest rose and fell beneath the blanket printed with constellations. Her stuffed bunny was tucked under one arm, and her mouth was slightly open, soft breaths whispering out. She looked peaceful, untouched by the mystery that had just re-entered their lives. He sank into the corner of the couch, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor as memories he thought had faded began flooding back. He remembered the first time he met Marisol Vega. It was just after Ava's 2nd birthday. The house was quiet, too quiet, and Keanu was overwhelmed. He was trying to balance film sets, interviews, and grief. Ava's mother had passed the year before, and the world had felt broken ever since. He needed help. Someone who could care for Ava in the way she deserved. Someone who didn't feel like a stranger in their home. The agency sent over a few candidates. All were qualified, polite, and polished. But Marisol was different. She didn't enter the house with a resume and practiced answers. She came with a quiet grace and a gentle smile. She knelt to Ava's level the moment she walked in, offered her a small stuffed fox, and asked in Spanish if she liked stories. Ava looked up at her shyly, then nodded. Within 5 minutes, Marisol had her giggling on the floor. That was all it took. Keanu hired her the next day. What followed were some of the most healing months of his life. Marisol didn't just care for Ava, she nurtured her. Every tantrum she met with patience. Every scraped knee she kissed softly and bandaged with a butterfly sticker. She sang lullabies in Spanish at bedtime, ones Keanu had never heard before but found himself humming at odd hours of the day. He remembered how Marisol would label objects around the house with sticky notes. Lamp, window, door, in both English and Spanish. Ava picked up words like sunlight, and she loved it. Sometimes, Marisol would hold Ava in her lap and read bilingual children's books, switching seamlessly between the 2 languages, whispering each sentence like it was a gift. But it wasn't just Ava who felt that care. Keanu started finding little notes in his own life too. A post-it on the fridge. "Don't skip breakfast. Ava needs your energy." A scribble on his script binder. "You're doing better than you think." He didn't know when it started, but soon, those notes felt like lifelines. He began to look forward to them. Began to look forward to her voice in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and chamomile tea in the morning, the way she'd laugh when Ava made up nonsense words. He didn't realize how much light she'd brought into their lives until the day she left. One memory stood out more than the rest. It was a Thursday in late October. Ava had come down with a terrible fever, the kind that made her cheeks glow and her tiny hands cling to Keanu's shirt like she was afraid of floating away. He'd called Marisol in a panic when the thermometer hit 103. She was supposed to be off that night, but she came immediately. She didn't hesitate. She walked through the door with a small canvas bag and a calm voice. She moved with quiet confidence, placing cool cloths on Ava's forehead, brewing herbal tea, whispering to her in Spanish while rocking her in the chair by the window. The fever slowly came down by midnight. Keanu sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, watching. His hair was a mess. He hadn't eaten all day. His shirt was wrinkled and wet from Ava's fevered sweat. But for the first time that day, he didn't feel panic in his chest. He felt something else. Gratitude. Peace. Something dangerously close to comfort. After Ava finally fell asleep, Marisol tucked her in and joined Keanu on the couch. Neither of them said much at first. They sat side by side in silence, listening to the hum of the baby monitor and the distant ticking of the old wall clock. Outside, wind pushed softly against the windows. Inside, everything felt still. Then Marisol broke the silence. "She's strong," she said softly, resting her hands on her knees. "Like her mother." Keanu nodded. "Yeah. She gets that from her." He paused, glancing at her sideways. "You remind me of her sometimes." Marisol looked surprised. "Your wife?" "She wasn't my wife," he said gently. "But she gave me Ava. That was enough." Marisol was quiet, absorbing that. "You remind me of someone too," she said after a moment. "Someone I lost a long time ago." He didn't ask who. The space between them wasn't for questions. It was for things unspoken. That night they talked until almost dawn. Nothing romantic, just quiet, open conversation. They talked about books they loved, childhood memories, dreams they hadn't told anyone else. Marisol confessed how she missed her family in Oaxaca, but didn't have the money or papers to bring them here. Keanu told her how some nights the silence in the house scared him more than anything. They didn't touch. They didn't even sit too close. But something passed between them, something invisible but unmistakable, a warmth, a knowing. And in the morning, it was gone. Marisol went back to her routine like nothing had happened. But something had changed. Keanu could feel it. Her smile was a little more distant. She stopped writing notes. She left as soon as her shift ended. She never stayed for tea. And then, a week later, he found a letter on the kitchen counter. The letter was short, just 2 paragraphs, written in Marisol's soft, rounded handwriting. "Dear Keanu, I'm so sorry to leave like this. My mother is very sick back home in Oaxaca and I have to go to her. I don't know how long I'll be gone, so it's best if I don't come back. Please tell Ava that I love her with all my heart." There was no forwarding address, no phone number, no promise to stay in touch. Just a small pressed flower tucked into the envelope. A purple jacaranda, dried flat. One Ava had given her weeks earlier on a walk to the park. Keanu stood at the counter for a long time that morning, rereading the letter. His coffee grew cold. The house felt quieter than ever. Ava was still asleep, unaware that by the time she woke up, the only person who had ever made her laugh in both languages would be gone. He didn't believe the story, not entirely. Yes, Marisol's mother might have been sick, but there had been no mention of illness before, no requests for help. And Marisol wasn't the kind of person to run without saying goodbye. Unless she had a reason. He'd tried to find her, called the agency, asked around. Nothing. They hadn't even had a full last name on file, just Vega. Her background check had been clean but limited, like she hadn't wanted to be found. Or maybe, like she'd erased parts of herself on purpose. Ava asked for her every day, for weeks. "Where's Marisol? Where is Marisol coming back? Can we call her?" Keanu told her Marisol had to go see her family, but even at 3 years old, Ava could tell something wasn't right. She started having nightmares, woke up crying, clutched the stuffed fox Marisol had given her like it was a lifeline. Keanu did his best, hired new help, kept routines steady, made pancakes the way Marisol used to. But it was never the same. Ava withdrew for a while, and Keanu, he carried the ache, silently. Tonight, standing under the stars with that pacifier in his pocket, it all came rushing back. The notes, the lullabies, the fever night. And now, this baby. The baby Marisol had run from him with. The baby that looked like Ava. Looked like him. He pulled the pacifier out and turned it in his palm. His throat tightened. This wasn't coincidence. His gut told him what his heart already feared. There had been more to that night than just quiet conversation. Something had happened. Maybe not the way stories usually begin, but enough. Enough to create a life. And now that life was out there. Not just alive, but loved, protected, hidden. He looked up at the sky, blinking hard. The city lights blurred above him, stars scattered across a velvet night. Somewhere in this city, his daughter might be sleeping, and he didn't even know her name. Keanu didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office, surrounded by quiet and shadow, the pacifier still within reach on the desk. His thoughts refused to slow down. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marisol's terrified face. The child's wide hazel eyes haunted him. He couldn't shake the chill in his spine, the sense that something enormous had been hidden from him. At sunrise, he made the call. Rory Chang, his head of security, picked up on the first ring. "Morning, boss. Everything okay?" "No," Keanu said flatly. "I need a favor. Quiet, fast, and thorough. But name it. I need footage. Last night's gala. Every entrance, every exit, every hallway. Focus on the dessert table at 9:10 p.m. I need to know who walked in with a woman named Marisol Vega, early 30s, black curls, holding a baby girl. The moment she left, everything." Rory paused, then said, "Understood. I'll have the team on it now." An hour later, Keanu was staring at a monitor in his living room, Ava still asleep upstairs. Rory had arrived with a drive full of compressed surveillance footage from the event organizers and hotel security. "Start here," Rory said, clicking into a time-stamped file. The screen flickered to life. Keanu watched the entryway of the hotel ballroom. Guests flowed in like clockwork, dressed in designer suits and glittering gowns, stopping for photos, laughing, sipping cocktails. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There," he said suddenly, paused. Rory froze the frame. There she was. Marisol. She looked different from how Keanu remembered her. Her hair was pulled back tightly, not loose around her face the way it used to be. She wore a dark green shawl draped to conceal the baby, but as she turned slightly, the child's face peeked out. Keanu pressed closer to the screen. He knew that expression, that solemn, curious gaze. It was Ava's gaze. But then he noticed something else. Marisol wasn't alone. Standing beside her, slightly behind, was a man. Tall, late 40s, dressed in plain black, with the alert posture of someone trained for threat assessment. Not a guest. Not a date. This man was protection. Keanu recognized the stance immediately. "Zoom in," Keanu said. Rory adjusted the resolution as much as the footage allowed. The man didn't look familiar, but his eyes never left the crowd. He wasn't there for drinks or pleasantries. He was watching. Guarding? Escorting? Keanu frowned. "Who is he?" he murmured. Rory was already making notes. Then Keanu pointed again. "Zoom in on the baby." The camera had caught a clean frame. Marisol shifting the child in her arms, the baby's tiny wrist exposed for a brief moment. There it was. A hospital ID bracelet. Even blurry, the letters stood out enough to read. Lilia Vega. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the screen, as if saying the name aloud might make it real. Lilia. The pieces started clicking. He looked at Rory. "How old do you think she looks?" Rory tilted his head. 18 months, maybe less." Keanu leaned back. 18 months? That was almost exactly 9 months after Marisol disappeared. Keanu stood up and paced the living room, his hands moving to the back of his neck. He could feel his pulse in his ears. The math didn't lie. Marisol had left without warning, citing her mother's illness. She vanished completely. No phone call, no update, no goodbye, and now, 18 months later, she walks into a gala with a baby girl bearing the Vega name. And Ava's eyes. Rory was quiet, watching him. "You think she's yours?" he asked gently. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked back at the screen, at the baby's face. "I don't know what to think," he finally said. "But I saw her. I saw those eyes. You've met Ava. You know what I mean." Rory nodded. Keanu returned to the couch and stared at the still frame. He zoomed in again, freezing the baby's expression. Lilia's mouth was slightly open, her brow furrowed like she was studying the room. Her hair was the same jet-black silk that Ava had as a toddler. Her nose, her chin, even the way she held her little hand close to her chest. It wasn't just resemblant. It was something deeper, like watching a ghost of Ava's earliest days brought back to life. Rory broke the silence. "I'll run facial analysis, might take a day or two. In the meantime, I'll try to ID the man she came in with. He's not on the guest list, which means someone smuggled him in under an alias or staff pass." Keanu nodded. "Do it, and keep this between us. No leaks. I don't want press sniffing around." "You got it." Rory left with the footage, and Keanu sat back down, but he couldn't focus. His mind raced in 100 directions. He kept thinking of the night Ava had that fever, the quiet talk afterward, the invisible line they never crossed, but maybe crossed in some way without realizing it. Had Marisol left because of guilt? Fear? Was she trying to protect him? Or the baby? He opened his laptop and typed Lilia Vega into the search bar. Nothing useful. Too many results. No matches in school enrollment databases. No public social media. No birth announcements. He tried narrowing it down by time. Babies born in Los Angeles 18 months ago under that name. Still nothing solid. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. There had to be a record, a birth certificate, a clinic, something. He picked up his phone and called a private investigator he'd worked with before, a quiet woman named Denise Tran, who specialized in family tracing. "Denise," he said when she answered, "I need help finding someone. Actually, 2 people." Her voice was alert. "Names? Marisol Vega. She used to work for me as a nanny, and a baby girl, about 18 months old. Her name is Lilia Vega." There was a pause. "And why the urgency?" Keanu hesitated. "Because I think the baby might be mine." Denise didn't ask anything else. She just said, "Give me 48 hours," and hung up. Keanu sat in the silence afterward, the weight of those words settling into his chest. He had said it out loud now. No more skirting the thought. No more wondering if it was just emotion clouding his mind. He had looked into the baby's eyes and seen the truth. Not proven, but undeniable in his heart. He got up and walked into Ava's room. She was still asleep, curled up with her stuffed fox. Her tiny chest rose and fell in rhythm. Keanu knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He studied her face like he was committing it to memory, and in his mind, it blurred with Lilia's face on the screen. Ava, Lilia, sisters? He backed out of the room and shut the door gently. By noon, Rory sent a message. A still frame pulled from the hotel's underground parking lot security footage. It showed Marisol exiting through the side stairwell and climbing into a dark SUV. The man was already holding the rear door open for her. The license plate was obscured. The vehicle had tinted windows and no visible registration from the angle. But Rory had something else. He sent another image, this time from a side corridor of the Gala. Keanu opened it and stared hard. The man who had walked with Marisol was standing near the ballroom exit, speaking into a small device clipped near his collar. Not a phone, a secure comm. He wasn't just muscle. He was trained, likely ex-military or law enforcement. Rory's caption confirmed it. Possible former contractor. Facial match pending. I'll keep digging. Keanu's stomach twisted. Why would Marisol need that kind of protection? Who was helping her? Hiding her? Was someone keeping her safe or keeping her hidden? And then his phone lit up with a voicemail. It was Denise. I found a birth record for a Lilia Vega born 18 months ago at a private maternity clinic in Boyle Heights. No listed father. Mother's name matches Marisol Vega. No insurance. Cash payment. The address on file is invalid, but I pulled surveillance from a nearby pharmacy from the same week she gave birth. I'm running a trace on the man who picked up the prescriptions. He matches the description of the man from your footage. Keanu's hand tightened on the phone. It was real. There was a birth certificate, a clinic, a name. He sat back down, the world tilting around him. He stared out the window toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip low. That soft golden hour light filtered through the curtains. He whispered the name again, just to feel the shape of it in his mouth. Lilia, his daughter. He didn't know where this path would lead. He only knew one thing with absolute clarity now. He had to find her, no matter what it took. 2 days later, the call came just after dawn. Keanu answered before the second ring. "Denise?" he said, already sitting up. "I found her," she said calmly. "She's working at a daycare center in Silver Lake. Been on the roster 3 weeks under her real name. No social media, no online footprint. She pays rent in cash, uses a P.O. box for mail, keeps to herself." Keanu rubbed his forehead, trying to absorb it. "Is she okay?" he asked quietly. "From what I can tell, yes. She drops the baby off at the same daycare she works at. Officially, the little girl is listed as her niece. Name matches? Lilia Vega. No father listed anywhere. She walks her in every morning, stays with the younger toddlers." Keanu's breath hitched. "She calls her niece?" he echoed, more to himself than to Denise. "It's a cover, obviously," she said. "But there's something else. I had someone observe the daycare for a few hours yesterday. The child, Lilia, she's very bright, curious, speaks both English and Spanish fluently for her age." Keanu's chest tightened. "Can you send me the address?" "Already did," Denise replied. "Texted it just now." Keanu opened the message. The location was only 40 minutes from his home. He sat there for a full minute, staring at the address, wondering what he would say, what he could say, if he even had the right. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up, pulled on a dark jacket, and quietly slipped out of the house before Ava woke up. Traffic was light that morning. The sun was still low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the hills as he drove east toward Silver Lake. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. He wasn't nervous. He was something else, a storm of emotions churning beneath a quiet surface. The daycare center was tucked away on a residential street lined with sycamore trees and pastel bungalows. It didn't look like much. Just a one-story converted house with a colorful sign that read, "Sprout and Bloom Learning Center." Keanu pulled up across the street and parked under a jacaranda tree. He didn't get out. Not yet. He watched from the car as parents trickled in, one by one, some still in workout gear, others rushing to beat morning meetings. Children in puffy jackets and sneakers waddled beside them, some crying, others laughing. Then he saw her. Marisol. She came out of the building, holding a paper coffee cup, her curls tied back loosely, strands of hair falling to frame her face. She looked tired but calm, dressed in jeans and a lavender cardigan, and next to her, holding her hand, was the child. Lilia, small with black curls tied into 2 uneven pigtails, wearing a little gray sweater with stars on it. Her face was animated as she babbled in Spanish. Her other hand clutched a small cloth bunny. Keanu's breath caught as he saw them walk back inside. He wasn't imagining it. Lilia was his daughter. And she was beautiful. Keanu remained in the car, frozen in place. Every instinct told him to get out, to walk across the street and go inside. But something restrained him. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the memory of the way Marisol had looked at him that night at the gala, like she'd seen a ghost and needed to run. He didn't want to scare her. Instead, he stayed still and waited. Minutes passed. Children's laughter echoed from the open playroom window. He could see inside, just barely, a cozy room filled with books, colorful rugs, and tiny tables covered in building blocks. Marisol sat cross-legged on the floor, with 4 toddlers surrounding her. She was singing softly in Spanish, swaying a little as the children clapped in rhythm. Lilia was seated just to her right, tapping her palms together and looking around with wide, focused eyes. Keanu couldn't hear the words of the song, but he recognized the melody. Marisol had sung it to Ava once. He remembered it vividly, a lullaby about a moon that watches over children as they sleep. He shifted forward in his seat, his hands curling into fists. That room, that woman, that baby. They felt like a dream pulled out of time, familiar and foreign all at once. Then Lilia turned. She looked straight at the window. Keanu didn't move. He wasn't even sure she could see him clearly from that distance, through the reflection of the morning sun on the glass. But she stared. And then, slowly, she smiled. Not a vague, casual smile, but one of recognition, as if she had seen him before, as if she knew him. Keanu's heart skipped. Lilia raised her little hand and waved. Keanu blinked. His eyes welled up. He lifted his own hand, barely realizing it, and gave the smallest wave in return. The moment lasted only seconds, but it changed something inside him. He leaned back, pressing his head against the headrest, overwhelmed. It was as if the last 2 years had been holding their breath, and now everything was exhaling at once. A teacher passed by behind Lilia, gently guiding her toward a reading nook. Marisol looked up, following the motion, and her gaze brushed the window. For a moment, Keanu thought she saw him, but she didn't react. Or maybe she did and buried it. She simply gathered the children into a circle and opened a picture book. Keanu's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a message from Rory. Man from Gala identified. Former private military contractor. Worked domestic protection detail for offshore clients. Nothing illegal, but he's good at making people disappear. Want me to dig into who hired him? Keanu typed back one word. Yes. Then he looked back toward the daycare. He knew he couldn't wait much longer. He had seen enough to be sure. Lilia wasn't just another child in Marisol's care. She was family, and Keanu was done watching from the outside. Keanu stepped out of the car. He didn't cross the street yet. He stood beside the door, steadying his breath, watching the wind shift the jacaranda leaves above him. Every part of him wanted to run to the entrance, but he reminded himself, this wasn't about him. It was about Lilia, about Marisol, about the story they had lived without him. He didn't want to barge in like a storm, so instead, he walked slowly to the sidewalk opposite the daycare, finding a spot where he could observe quietly. Across the glass, Lilia had now joined another toddler at the play kitchen. She pretended to stir soup in a plastic pot, her small hands deliberate and confident. Marisol crouched beside her, placing a chef's hat on her head with a grin. Lilia giggled. That laugh hit Keanu like a lightning bolt. It was Ava's laugh. Sound he knew by heart. That same high, rising tone when something truly delighted her. He leaned against the tree, swallowing hard. He had missed her first steps, her first words, first birthday, first scraped knee, all those little firsts that filled the soul. But he was here now, and he wasn't leaving again. Back in the daycare, Lilia turned once more to the window. This time, she didn't wave, she just looked. Her gaze was calm, almost knowing. Then Marisol followed her line of sight. Her eyes locked with Keanu's. For a long second, they both didn't move. No one else noticed. Not the other teachers, not the children, just them. The air between them held a decade's worth of silence. Marisol slowly stood up. Her face changed. Shock, sadness, something between guilt and relief. She moved toward the window, eyes never leaving his. Keanu didn't gesture, he didn't speak. He just waited. And then, she did something he didn't expect. She gave the smallest nod. It wasn't an invitation. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Keanu felt something lift from his chest. It was happening. The wall between them had cracked. Now it was time to find out why it was built in the first place. Keanu drove home in silence. The sun had already risen higher, and the streets of Los Angeles buzzed with the familiar weekday rhythm. Bikers weaving through traffic, joggers pounding sidewalks, delivery vans inching down narrow roads. But none of it registered. He was replaying that nod, the way Marisol had looked at him, the unspoken message in her eyes. It had been permission, but also a warning. He pulled into his driveway, stepped out of the car, and instinctively walked to the mailbox before heading inside. He almost missed it. Tucked between a magazine and a real estate flyer was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address, just his name, handwritten in soft, slanted print. Keanu. He froze. He looked up and down the street. Empty. He opened the envelope right there at the curb. Inside was a small, folded sheet of lined paper. It smelled faintly of lavender and ink. The message was short. Only one sentence. Please stop looking for us. Lilia is safe. Some secrets are best left alone. No name. No signature. Just that. Keanu stared at it, heart pounding. He turned the paper over. Something else was inside. But a second piece. Folded smaller. Crayon drawings on the back. He opened it carefully. It was a child's drawing. A stick figure man with dark hair. A girl with short pigtails. And between them, a baby, smiling, with a yellow sun above her head. Underneath the baby's figure, in jagged letters, one word, Lilia. Above them, floating in the air, a crooked rocket ship. Keanu's breath hitched. He pressed the drawing against his chest, eyes shutting tight. That rocket ship. He used to draw it with Ava. They had a routine every Sunday morning. Breakfast, then crafts. The rocket ship always made an appearance. It had a little trail of stars behind it, sometimes a smiley face in the window. Ava used to say, "Daddy, we're flying to the moon to bring back dreams." And here it was, drawn by a child who had never seen him, who had no way of knowing, unless someone told her. Unless, Keanu turned and walked slowly inside, the letter trembling in his hand. He laid it all out on the kitchen table. The letter, the drawing, the envelope. Then he sat down in the chair he always used when tucking Ava's lunchbox into her backpack each morning. And for the first time in a long time, he wept. Keanu stared at the letter for what felt like hours. He reread it over and over, as if the curve of the handwriting might reveal something deeper, some hidden meaning, some code. But it always said the same thing. Please stop looking for us. That single sentence carried a weight far heavier than the paper it was written on. It wasn't just a plea. It was a wall being rebuilt, a line drawn, and it terrified him. Why would Marisol say that? Why would she hide if Lilia was his child? Keanu picked up the drawing again, his fingers trembling slightly. The figures were simple, just stick people, but the emotion behind them felt undeniable. The little girl in the center had his crooked smile, the same shape to the eyes. The rocket was his touch, his memory somehow passed down like a secret through space and time. It shook him to the core. He stood and began pacing his kitchen, hands behind his head. There had to be more. Someone had dropped that letter. That meant they were watching him, maybe even following him. The idea sent a chill down his spine. He picked up his phone and called Denise. "Check security footage from the house," he said, skipping pleasantries. "Someone left a letter in my mailbox. No return address. I need to know who." Denise didn't ask questions. "On it," she replied. Keanu hung up and moved toward the sliding glass door. Ava was still asleep upstairs. Her backpack rested on the couch, ready for preschool. He thought of her laugh, her open heart, her questions. What would she ask if she saw Lilia? Would she recognize her? Feel something? Would she even understand? He remembered Marisol's voice the day she left. "I'm sorry, Keanu, I have to go. My mother's ill. In Oaxaca. I'll try to write." But she never wrote. And now this. A picture, a name, a warning. The drawing felt like a gift. The letter felt like a lock. He sat back down, resting his elbows on the table, burying his face in his hands. He didn't want to cause harm. He didn't want to disrupt their lives. But he also couldn't ignore what he now believed with all his heart. That little girl was his daughter. And if he had learned anything in his life, especially after loss, it was this. You don't run from love. You run toward it, even if it hurts, even if it cost you everything. Later that afternoon, Denise called back. "We reviewed the security footage, Keanu," she said. "A woman dropped the letter at 6:13 IE. She approached on foot, hoodie up, but the cameras caught enough of her face. It's Marisol." Keanu didn't breathe for a second. Jean came alone, no car. She walked from the direction of Hillhurst Avenue, then turned back the same way. Took her less than 10 seconds. Slipped the letter in, looked at your house, then left. Keanu sat down on the edge of the sofa. "Jean was here," he said aloud. "She risked everything just to leave that letter," Denise said. "I can't say whether that's a warning or a message, or maybe it's her way of giving you one last piece of the puzzle." Keanu ran a hand through his hair. "Do we know where she went?" "We've got access to street cams nearby. It'll take a few hours to run all the data, but we'll try to trace her route." "Thanks," he said, then hung up. He looked at the drawing again. Something about it tugged at him differently now. He reached into the drawer by the kitchen and pulled out Ava's latest craft project, a paper crown with glitter and stars. Then he walked to his study, opened the bottom drawer, and took out an old leather-bound journal he hadn't touched in years. Inside were Polaroids of Ava's early days, and tucked between two pages, a crayon drawing of their Sunday rocket ship. He placed the two drawings side by side, nearly identical. Same shape, same tail, same crooked smile on the man in the window. It wasn't coincidence. It was blood. A knock came at the front door. Not loud, not urgent, gentle. Keanu stood slowly. For a brief second he wondered. But it wasn't Marisol. It was Rory. "I thought you'd want this," Rory said, holding out a manila envelope. "It's the full dossier on the man from the Gala. His name's Mateo Guerra. He worked as a private security contractor for a woman named Dr. Helena Vasquez, a fertility specialist. She owns the clinic where Lilia was born." Keanu's brow furrowed. Vasquez has a history of working with private families, rich clients, politicians, people who want anonymity. We pulled some records, mostly sealed. But she's not just a fertility doctor. She also runs a discreet surrogate advisory practice. Keanu's pulse ticked up. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying Marisol might have gone to her for protection, not just delivery," Rory said. "Someone helped her stay hidden. This woman, this Mateo Guerra. Someone wanted Lilia off the grid. Not for safety, maybe for secrecy." Keanu turned toward the window again, staring into the soft light pouring over the front yard. It was all unraveling. Whatever Marisol had run from, it wasn't just circumstance. It was bigger. Someone powerful had been involved. Someone who could erase identities and close records. He looked back at Rory. "Then we find Dr. Vasquez," he said. We find out what she knows. Rory nodded. Already started. She has an office in Westwood, low profile, private appointments only. But we'll get in. Keanu's voice dropped low. No more waiting. As Rory left, Keanu folded the drawing from the mailbox and slipped it into his pocket. It no longer felt like a warning. It felt like an invitation. Keanu didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fireplace, the pink pacifier with tiny moons resting on the coffee table like a sacred object. It felt absurd. How something so small could carry the weight of a lifetime. But it wasn't just plastic and silicone. It was a key to a truth he couldn't ignore any longer. By morning, he had made up his mind. He didn't want rumors. He didn't want speculation or instinct. He wanted the truth, on paper, in ink, without emotion clouding it. He called Dr. Sanjay Mehta, a trusted physician and longtime friend who had handled some of his most personal matters over the years. By noon, they met in a small private office at a discreet clinic outside Beverly Hills. Sanjay looked up from the pacifier, then back at Keanu. "You're serious about this?" Keanu nodded. "I need to know. You sure you want to go down this road?" "No," Keanu said, "but I have to." Sanjay didn't push further. He carefully placed the pacifier into a sterile container and labeled it. "I'll expedite this," he said. "We'll compare the DNA with your blood sample. You'll have results in 24 hours. Keanu exhaled. "Thanks," he said quietly. As he left the clinic, he felt a strange mix of peace and dread. That night, he couldn't turn off his mind. Instead of watching television or trying to distract himself, he went to his study and pulled out his old phone, the one he had kept locked away for 2 years. It still had all the old text from Marisol. He opened the thread, and immediately the memories returned. Lines filled with affection, jokes, lullaby lyrics. One message read, "Ava asked if the moon has a daddy. I told her yes, but he's quiet and kind and always watching." Another one from a late night. "I made lentil soup for Ava today. She said it tasted like hugs. I cried." But then came the shift. The messages had started changing in tone a few weeks before she left. Shorter replies, less warmth, mentions of stress, sleepless nights. Then, this one, "Keanu, there are things I can't explain right now, but I'm doing what I have to. Please, don't hate me." It was the last text she ever sent. He stared at that message for a long time, wondering what fear had driven her to disappear. He didn't hate her, but he needed the truth. Tomorrow, he'd have it. The next morning, Keanu was already awake when his phone buzzed. The clinic name flashed on the screen. He answered immediately. "Sanjay?" There was a pause. Then, "Keanu, I've got the results. You might want to sit down." "I'm already sitting." "It's a match, a strong one. 99.7% probability. That baby girl is your biological daughter." Keanu's breath left his lungs. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. "Are you absolutely sure?" he finally asked, his voice unsteady. Sanjay responded gently. "The sample was clean, no contamination. The pacifier had enough DNA to process. It matches your genetic markers across multiple points. There's no question." Keanu leaned forward, placing a hand on his forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "Really." After hanging up, he sat motionless on the edge of the couch. Outside the window, birds chirped and sprinklers ticked to life across the yard. But everything felt muted. He was a father. Again. And he hadn't known. He stood and began pacing, too full of energy to sit still. He picked up the crayon drawing again, studying it with new eyes. The rocket. The smile. Lilia's name. All of it now screamed something he could no longer deny. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was legacy. But beneath the wonder there was something else creeping in. Betrayal. Why hadn't Marisol told him? Why had she carried this secret for nearly 2 years? Was it fear? Shame? or something worse? His mind swirled with questions, none of them having easy answers. He thought of Ava. How would she feel knowing she had a half-sister, or possibly a full one? He thought of Marisol again. Her warmth, her gentleness, her steady voice in the middle of storms. The woman who had held his daughter when he couldn't. The woman who had soothed both their hearts after Jennifer's death. And now that woman had disappeared, taking his child with her. It cut deep. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was hurt and confused. He walked into Ava's room, the soft hum of her white noise machine still playing. She was asleep, tangled in her blankets, one arm stretched above her head like she was flying in a dream. Keanu crouched beside her bed and whispered, "You have a sister." The words were almost surreal, but they were true now. He placed a kiss on her forehead, stood quietly, and walked back to the hallway. There was no going back, only forward. Keanu found himself staring at the DNA report again that evening, even though he'd memorized every word, every number, 99.7%. It echoed in his head like a bell. He'd had suspicions, hopes, but nothing prepared him for the truth hitting this hard. Lilia wasn't just some distant possibility. She was his daughter, his blood, his responsibility. And he hadn't been there when she took her first breath. He hadn't rocked her to sleep, hadn't soothed her when she cried at night, or witnessed the miracle of her first words. Someone else had held her in those sacred moments. Someone else had watched her grow. He didn't know what was worse, the pain of being excluded or the betrayal of being erased. He sat down at the dining table, the report beside the drawing and the pacifier. Together they formed a strange kind of timeline. Proof of life, proof of love, and proof of silence. He picked up his phone again, scrolling through the old messages one more time, this time paying closer attention. He looked for clues, codes, anything he might have missed. And there it was. A message dated a week before she gave notice. Just one sentence. Sometimes silence protects more than the truth ever can. At the time, he hadn't understood it. He thought maybe she was talking about grief or her own struggles. Now, he wasn't so sure. What had Marisol been protecting him from? Or, what had she been protecting herself from? He wondered if she'd been threatened. If someone, perhaps from that clinic, or someone she trusted, had pushed her to disappear. Was the man at the Gala, Mateo Guerra, part of her protection or her imprisonment? Keanu opened a new browser window and began searching for Dr. Helena Vasquez again. He found a few vague references: private fertility consultant, mostly international clients, no public reviews, no address listed beyond a medical suite in Westwood. Everything about her screamed discretion, secrecy. He copied the clinic's number and handed it off to Denise. "Get me an appointment. I don't care what it takes." Later that night, after Ava had gone to bed, Keanu stood alone on his balcony, arms crossed over his chest. The city lights flickered below, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, thin and sharp against the night. He thought of Lilia again. What did she like to eat? Did she laugh the same way Ava did? Did she love rockets? Did she cry when she missed people? Did she even know he existed? He felt tears press behind his eyes, not from anger, but from grief, for time stolen, moments missed, and the absence of choices. He didn't want to rip Lilia out of the only life she'd known. He didn't want to drag Marisol through the courts or make their reunion some public spectacle. That wasn't who he was. But he also couldn't live in the dark anymore. If Lilia had his blood, she deserved to have his love too. He thought back to the day Marisol first came into their lives. She had held Ava like she was holding something sacred. He remembered Ava curling up in her arms during thunderstorms, her tiny hands gripping Marisol's shirt. He remembered thinking she wasn't just a nanny. She was family. Maybe more. And now she had disappeared again. But not completely. The pacifier, the drawing, the letter. Each one, a thread. Keanu wasn't going to pull the threads apart to punish her. He was going to follow them until he reached her. And Lilia, no matter how long it took, no matter how many answers still lingered in silence. He was ready now, not just to know the truth, but to live it. The message came late in the afternoon. Keanu was sitting in the backyard watching Ava play in her sandbox when his phone vibrated. It was a number he didn't recognize. No name, no hint of location. Just a simple message. Zuma Beach, sunset, come alone. You deserve the truth. He read it 3 times, then again. His stomach tightened. There was no signature, no emoji, no indication of who had sent it. But in his bones, he knew. Marisol. He stood, heart racing. He told Ava they'd watch her favorite movie after dinner, kissed her on the head, and handed her off to his assistant with instructions to stay in until he returned. The drive to Zuma Beach was quiet. Keanu kept the windows down. The sky was a wash of lavender and rose, and the sun was already dipping low, setting fire to the edge of the ocean. As he stepped onto the sand, shoes in one hand, phone in the other, his eyes scanned the beach. It wasn't crowded, just a few couples walking the shore, some surfers packing up their gear, and near a curve of driftwood further down, a figure sat still, silhouetted against the setting sun. He knew it was her. Marisol. She turned slightly as he approached, and for a moment it was like stepping into a memory. She sat on the driftwood log, hair pulled into a loose braid, barefoot, holding a child in her lap. Lilia, the little girl, was nestled against her chest, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, her small hand gripping Marisol's sweater. Keanu stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. The wind carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed wood. Waves crashed gently in the distance. Marisol met his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come. I wasn't sure I should," he replied. She looked down at Lilia, then back up. "But you did." He nodded. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Marisol gently shifted Lilia, who was half asleep, to her other shoulder. "She loves the ocean," she said quietly. "The sound helps her sleep." Keanu took a breath. "Why, Marisol?" Her eyes shimmered, reflecting the last of the light. "Because I was afraid." "Of me?" She shook her head. "Of what you'd think. Of ruining the only family you had left." Keanu moved closer and sat down beside her on the sand, leaving space between them. "I had a right to know." "I know," she whispered. "But I wasn't ready to let you decide what was best for her. Not yet." Keanu looked out at the horizon, where the sky touched the sea in a burning line of orange. "You disappeared," he said softly. "No call, no letter, not even goodbye." Marisol's voice cracked. "I wrote one. A letter. I just never sent it." Women nod. "I didn't trust myself," she admitted. "I thought if I told you, you'd either feel obligated to take care of us, or worse, resent me." "Resent her?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "I would have done anything for you. For her. That was never the question. But it was for me," she said. "I didn't know if I could carry the guilt if you chose to walk away, so I convinced myself it was better if you never knew." Lilia stirred slightly, and Marisol instinctively rocked her, humming softly under her breath. A lullaby Keanu remembered hearing once, years ago, during one of Ava's sleepless nights. The melody wrapped around them, fragile and haunting. He closed his eyes. "Where did you take the nanny job?" he asked suddenly. She exhaled, as if she'd been waiting for that question. "I was already pregnant when I applied," she said. "Barely 6 weeks. I was scared, alone, but I knew one thing. I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing the kind of man you were, even if you never found out the truth." Keanu turned toward her, stunned. "You came into our lives, knowing?" Marisol nodded slowly. I wanted Lilia to have something good in her life, something stable. Watching you with Ava, I thought, maybe, she'd grow up seeing who her father was from a distance. That would be enough. But then you left. I had to. The closer we got, the more Lilia looked like you, the harder it became to pretend. He stared down at the sand between his shoes. There was so much to say, so much he didn't know how to express. Emotions clashed in his chest: grief, confusion, awe, betrayal, longing. Finally, he asked quietly, "Does she know?" Marisol gave a bittersweet smile. "She calls you the Sky Man." Keanu blinked. "What?" "She watches your interviews, clips from your movies. She thinks you fly. I told her you're an explorer, a protector. She calls you the Sky Man because she says you look like someone who belongs in the clouds." His throat tightened. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "She loves you," Marisol said, her voice soft, "even without knowing you." Keanu swallowed the lump forming. "Then it's time she does." The breeze grew colder as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in fading streaks of coral and steel blue. Keanu shifted closer, not to close the gap between them, but to be near his daughter. He studied Lilia's face. Even in sleep, her expression mirrored Ava's at that age. The same soft curve of the cheek, the gentle curl of her lashes, the way her lips parted in dreams. A memory came rushing back. Ava asleep in the crook of his arm after a long day at the park, her body heavy with trust. It had been the same peace, the same surrender to safety. Keanu reached out, slowly, placing a hand gently over Lilia's blanket-covered leg. Marisol didn't flinch. If anything, her shoulders relaxed. "I missed her whole first year," he said, his voice low, as though trying not to wake the sea. Her first laugh, her first steps, her first words. Marisol nodded. Her first word was agua. I think it was because I always kept a bottle nearby, and the second one was moon. He looked at her in surprise. "She has a nightlight shaped like one," Marisol explained. "She sleeps with it every night." Keanu gave a slow smile, one filled with emotion. "Ava has a moon nightlight too. She picked it out herself, said it reminded her of her mom." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not accusation. Something deeper, a shared understanding that life had forked in ways neither of them planned. "I didn't keep her from you to punish you," Marisol said softly. "I kept her from you because I wasn't sure I could survive being rejected. I didn't know if you were ready for another child, especially with someone like me." "Someone like you?" She hesitated, then smiled sadly. "A woman who was once your employee, a woman who was grieving too, a woman who, on some level, loved you." The words hung in the air. Keanu didn't respond right away. Not because he didn't feel anything, but because too many things rushed through him at once. "I was grieving too," he finally said. "And in the middle of it, you were a light. You kept my family from falling apart." She exhaled shakily. "I didn't fall in love with you," he said. "But I trusted you. And I cared for you. Still do." Marisol nodded. "That's enough for me." He looked at Lilia again. "I don't want to take her away from you. I would never do that. But I want to be in her life." Marisol's eyes filled with tears. "She needs you. I need her." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the waves and the shifting sand. When Lilia stirred and opened her eyes, she blinked up at her mother, then at the man beside them. Her face brightened. "Sky Man," she whispered sleepily. Keanu smiled through wet eyes. He opened his arms gently. "Can I hold her?" Marisol nodded and handed her over with careful hands. Lilia nestled into Keanu's chest like she'd done it 1,000 times. He held her tightly, the weight of her small body anchoring something in him that had been drifting for years. "I'm here now," he whispered. And he meant it. The morning after the beach meeting, Keanu stood in the kitchen pouring cereal for Ava, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. Every now and then, she'd glance up from her coloring book and squint at him, her expression thoughtful, curious. Finally, she asked, "Did you cry last night?" Keanu froze. He turned to her with a half smile. "Yeah, a little." Ava nodded, like that made perfect sense. "Sometimes I cry when I miss people too." He crouched down beside her. "Ava, how would you feel about meeting someone very special today?" Her eyes lit up. "Is it a puppy?" He chuckled. "Nope, not a puppy. A baby?" "Close," he said. "She's a little younger than you." She leaned forward, intrigued. "What's her name?" "Lilia." Ava tested the name on her tongue. "Lilia," she repeated. "Is she nice?" "I think you'll like her," Keanu said. "She likes the beach, just like you." Ava smiled. "Then I want to go." An hour later, they arrived at Zuma Beach again. The tide was lower, and the sun was gentler than the night before. Marisol was already there, sitting on a towel with Lilia beside her. The little girl had a sun hat on and was digging into a small bucket of sand with fierce concentration. Ava hesitated when they stepped onto the sand. She grabbed Keanu's hand and squeezed it tightly. He gave her a reassuring look. Marisol stood when she saw them, lifting a hand in a quiet wave. Keanu guided Ava forward. "This is Marisol," he said gently. Ava gave a shy smile and stayed close to his side. Then she saw Lilia. The toddler stood up wobbly, holding a small seashell in both hands. Without a word, she toddled toward Ava, her eyes wide and curious. Ava didn't move. Lilia reached her and held out the seashell like it was treasure. Ava slowly took it from her, then examined it closely. "It's pretty," she said. Lilia grinned. That was all it took. Within minutes, the two girls were crouched in the sand, building lopsided castles and drawing squiggles with sticks. Lilia babbled in a mix of English and Spanish, and Ava nodded like she understood every word. Keanu and Marisol sat a short distance away, watching in silence. "He's amazing with other kids," Marisol said. "So's Ava," Keanu replied. "But she's never played this easily with anyone before." Marisol smiled, then looked away. Maybe they already know. On some level, Keanu believed that too. As the afternoon wore on, the girls raced up and down the beach, chasing seagulls and tumbling over one another in the soft sand. Their laughter rang through the air. Free, light, and contagious. Keanu watched with a kind of reverence. It felt like witnessing something sacred. Two children born into separate chapters of his life, somehow now playing together as if time and pain had never divided them. Ava suddenly plopped down beside Lilia and began showing her how to arrange seashells in a circle. Lilia mimicked her perfectly, then tossed one in the air and squealed with delight when Ava caught it. "They're naturals," Keanu murmured. Marisol's voice was quiet. "She doesn't usually warm up this fast. Lilia's always been cautious." "She takes after you," Keanu said with a small smile. Marisol didn't deny it. "She's sensitive, strong-willed, but gentle when she feels safe." Keanu turned his gaze to Ava. "That sounds familiar." Ava stood up and brushed sand off her knees. She turned to Keanu, eyes wide with something deeper than curiosity now, something more like understanding. "She looks like me," Ava said. Keanu nodded, not sure how much she truly saw. "But littler," Ava added, her voice soft. He smiled gently. "That's because she's your sister." Ava blinked. She looked back at Lilia, who was now trying to stuff sand into her tiny shoe. "My sister?" she repeated. Keanu nodded again, slower this time. "Yes, sweetheart. Her name is Lilia, and she's your little sister." There was a long pause. Keanu held his breath. Ava looked back at Lilia. Her brows drew together slightly, as if fitting pieces of a puzzle. Then she knelt beside her, helped her get the shoe off, and gently dumped out the sand. Lilia looked up, confused, then smiled. Ava leaned closer and whispered something that made Lilia giggle. She turned back to Keanu. "Can she stay with us?" Keanu felt something crack open in his chest, not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of love. He swallowed hard. "We'll have to talk about that, but if Marisol agrees, I'd like that too." Ava nodded solemnly. "Okay, but I want her to have the moonlight too, the blue one." Marisol chuckled. "She already does." The girls went back to playing, and Keanu and Marisol sat in the quiet that followed. The tide rolled in, and the sun began its slow descent again, streaking the sky with hints of peach and gold. "Sheem called you Skyman again this morning," Marisol said, brushing hair from her eyes. Keanu smiled. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of that." "She used to cry when I turned off your movies," Marisol said, "especially when you flew." Keanu laughed softly. "Now she gets to see I don't actually have wings." "She doesn't mind," Marisol said. "She said she likes you better with feet." They both laughed, the tension between them finally easing into something more honest. "What happens next?" Marisol asked after a long pause. Keanu looked at her, thoughtful. "Whatever's best for them. Not for us." Marisol nodded. "I agree. I want to help," he added. "Not just financially. I want to be her father, her real one." "You already are," Marisol said. Keanu looked back at the two girls side by side, digging a long line in the sand like a shared treasure map. "I missed so much," he said. "But you're here now," she replied. "That's what matters." Ava stood up suddenly and ran toward him, her hair wild and her cheeks flushed. "She wants to see your house," Ava said, panting. "She wants to see my room and the backyard. I told her we have pancakes on Sundays." Keanu turned to Marisol. "Would that be all right?" Marisol hesitated just a second, then nodded. "Yes, I think it's time." Lilia toddled over next, grabbing Ava's hand like it was second nature. Two little girls, one beginning, and a man learning that love doesn't always come in the order you expect, but it shows up exactly when you need it most. That night, Keanu's house was filled with the quiet clatter of silverware and soft laughter. Ava insisted that Lilia sit beside her at the long wooden dining table. She helped her scoop mashed potatoes and passed her a piece of buttered corn. Marisol watched from across the table, overwhelmed by how natural it all felt, like something sacred was being gently restored. Lilia babbled between bites, eyes wide with discovery at every new taste. She pointed to the syrup jug and said, "Cafe," then giggled when Keanu corrected her and said, "Nope, just maple." The moment was peaceful, whole. Keanu had never seen his home so alive. But peace has a fragile edge. Midway through dinner, Lilia started coughing. At first it was light, almost dainty. Then it deepened. She coughed again, hard this time. Her small body shook with the force of it. Keanu stood from his chair. Lilia's cheeks flushed, her lips lost color. The coughing grew more desperate. She wheezed, her little fists clenched at her chest. "Marisol," Keanu shouted. Marisol was already on her feet, grabbing Lilia into her arms, trying to soothe her. But the baby was limp now, pale. Her breath rattled. "We need to go," Keanu said, already snatching his keys and reaching for the emergency bag he'd kept packed ever since Ava was born. Marisol clutched Lilia tightly in the back seat while Keanu raced through Los Angeles traffic, his heart slamming against his ribs. Ava stayed behind with her sitter, unaware of the emergency unfolding around the people she loved. When they arrived at the ER, Keanu burst through the doors and shouted for help. Nurses rushed forward. Marisol was crying now, unable to form words as they took Lilia from her arms. Keanu held her by the shoulders, forcing himself to stay steady. "She's strong," he said. "She's going to be okay." But even he didn't fully believe it. They were told to wait outside the exam room. Minutes stretched into a void of silence, pierced only by the distant beeps of hospital monitors and the hum of fluorescent lights. Keanu stood near the window, his fists clenched, eyes locked on the pale moonlight beyond the glass. Marisol sat with her hands shaking, clutching the pacifier Lilia had dropped earlier. When the doctor finally came out, his face was serious, calm, but not casual. "She has a congenital heart defect," he said. Keanu's heart sank. The doctor continued. "It's called atrial septal defect, essentially a hole between the two upper chambers of her heart. It can sometimes go undetected in early infancy, but over time it can lead to trouble with oxygen levels, fatigue, respiratory distress." Marisol gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. "But she's always been playful, strong. She never showed signs." The doctor nodded gently. "That's not uncommon. Children compensate well, until they suddenly don't. The coughing you saw tonight was the body struggling to oxygenate properly. It's manageable, but she'll need surgery, sooner rather than later." Keanu swallowed. "How soon?" "We can stabilize her tonight and schedule the procedure within the next few days. The good news is it's highly treatable. Success rates are strong." Marisol let out a shaky breath. "Is she in pain?" "Some discomfort, yes. But she's resting now. You can see her soon." When the doctor left, Marisol broke. Her tears came hard, unchecked, pouring down her cheeks. She tried to hide her face, but Keanu knelt beside her and gently pulled her into an embrace. "Should have taken her to a cardiologist," she whispered. "I thought it was just a cold. She'd get tired sometimes, but I didn't think—" "Stop," Keanu said, his voice quiet but firm. "You did what you thought was best. You protected her. You raised her alone. You've given everything." She buried her face in his shoulder. "And I wasn't there," he added. "I didn't even know she existed. I should have seen it in her eyes the moment I did, that she was mine." They held each other in the hallway, surrounded by the cold hush of fluorescent lighting and the muted footsteps of nurses moving behind glass doors. "We almost lost her," Keanu whispered, "before we even had the chance." Marisol nodded against him. "I've lived in fear every day since she was born, but I didn't expect this." When they were finally allowed into the room, Lilia lay in a small bed under a tangle of wires and gentle monitors. Her chest rose and fell with effort, but she was stable. Her small hand clutched a worn plush rabbit. When she saw Keanu and Marisol, her lips moved weakly. "Sky Man." Keanu smiled, tears stinging his eyes. He stepped closer and knelt beside her. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached toward him. He took her hand and pressed it to his cheek. "You're gonna get better, baby girl," he whispered. "And then, I'm going to show you how to really fly." Behind him, Marisol leaned over and kissed Lilia's forehead, whispering soft Spanish lullabies like she had when Ava was little. It brought a kind of fragile peace to the room. Keanu sat through the night at Lilia's side, holding her hand, watching the monitor, memorizing every flicker of her pulse. Morning came slowly, turning the hospital room into a pale golden cocoon. A nurse entered quietly. "We've scheduled the surgery for Thursday morning. Dr. McIntyre is one of the best pediatric cardiologists on the West Coast." Keanu nodded. "We'll be ready." As the nurse left, he looked over at Marisol, asleep in the chair near the bed. He looked back at Lilia and whispered, "We're all going to be ready." In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the weight of fear and hope intertwined, Keanu made a silent promise. No matter what happened next, Lilia would never again have to face the world without her father beside her. 3 days later, dawn crept over Los Angeles in soft gray layers as Keanu pulled into the parking lot of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The city was still quiet, but inside his chest, everything raced. His daughter, his second daughter, was scheduled for open-heart surgery within the hour. He stepped out of the car and looked over at Marisol. Her eyes were tired but steady. She held Lilia against her chest as the little girl slept peacefully, unaware of what was ahead. In the back seat, Ava clutched a piece of folded paper in her lap. "You ready to give it to her?" Keanu asked gently. Ava nodded, then glanced toward the hospital's tall glass entrance. "Will it hurt her?" Keanu paused, crouched beside her, and brushed a hand over her cheek. "She won't feel it. She'll be asleep, and when she wakes up, her heart will be stronger." Ava bit her lip and nodded again. Inside the hospital, they were greeted by nurses already familiar with Lilia's case. A quiet urgency filled the halls. They moved swiftly but kindly, guiding the family toward pre-opera. Dr. Sandra Lynn, a leading pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon, approached with a clipboard in hand. Her eyes were calm, her presence firm but warm. "She's in good hands," she assured them. "We've reviewed everything. She's strong. We expect a smooth procedure." "How long?" Keanu asked. 5 hours, give or take," she replied. "We'll keep you updated every hour." Marisol didn't say a word. Her lips moved in silent prayer as she leaned in and kissed Lilia's forehead. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed the baby to the surgical nurse. Lilia stirred, blinking at the lights above. She reached toward Keanu, and he leaned in close. "You're going on a little adventure, okay?" he whispered. "And when you wake up, we'll be right here." Lilia's tiny fingers curled around his. "You stay and never leave," he said. A nurse gently prized her fingers away. Marisol turned her head as the doors closed, hiding her face behind her hair. Ava clung to Keanu's side, her small body trembling. They waited in the family lounge, Keanu pacing, Marisol kneeling with rosary beads between her fingers, and Ava curled on the couch with a box of crayons, slowly coloring. When the first hour passed, a nurse entered with an update. "She's doing great. Everything's on track." The second hour passed more slowly. Keanu tried to sit but couldn't stay still. Every minute stretched like a rubber band pulled to the edge of snapping. He watched the door like it might breathe. Marisol hadn't moved from the corner. Her lips still murmured quietly in Spanish, fingers pressing prayer beads one by one. Her faith was deep, but her fear cut through every word. Keanu could feel it in the room like static. Ava stood up and walked over, holding her drawing. "I think I'm finished." He took it from her hands and unfolded it. The crayon picture showed two girls, hand in hand, beneath a rainbow. Their stick figure heads had matching dark hair. A heart floated above them. Shin drew herself and Lilia, Ava said. "And that's you and Mommy watching from the clouds." Keanu stared at the picture, throat tightening. He crouched and pulled Ava into his arms. "I'm not in the clouds," he whispered. "I'm right here." She nodded into his chest. "But Mommy is." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both felt it. The nurse returned after the third hour. They're working on closing the septal wall now. Her vitals remain strong. Marisol nodded, then whispered a single word. "Gracias." Keanu sat down beside her. He didn't speak. Just let the silence hang as they both listened to the sound of children's cartoons playing quietly from the waiting room TV. At the 5-hour mark, the door opened again. This time, it was Dr. Lynn herself. "She's out of surgery. It went very well. We closed the hole and she responded beautifully to anesthesia. She's stable and there were no complications during the procedure." Keanu exhaled hard, almost buckling under the wave of relief. Marisol let out a small gasp that turned into a sob, her hand flying to her mouth. "She's in recovery now," Dr. Lynn added. "She'll be groggy for a while, but one of you can come in shortly." "Both of us," Keanu said, standing. "If that's okay?" The doctor smiled. "Of course." 10 minutes later, they walked into a small room filled with soft beeping and gentle light. Lilia lay wrapped in a warm blanket, a nasal cannula giving her oxygen, her tiny chest rising and falling slowly. Keanu stepped forward, his hands shaking. He leaned in beside her bed and whispered her name. "Lilia." Her eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped her lips. It wasn't clear at first, just breathy syllables caught in a fog. Then it came again, soft and full of need. The word landed like lightning. Keanu's legs nearly gave out. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, tears pouring freely now, nothing restrained, nothing hidden. "I'm here, baby girl," he said through a voice that cracked. "I'm here." Marisol stood just behind him, hand over her heart, watching as Keanu gently kissed Lilia's forehead, then held her hand in both of his. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and yet she had made it through. Her heart had been broken, then repaired, stitched together not just by medicine, but by something greater. "I love you," Keanu whispered. "You're safe now." Lilia blinked slowly, her hand twitching in his. Her lips curved, just a little. He stayed there for what felt like hours, his forehead resting lightly on the edge of the bed, not saying another word, just breathing beside her. Later, when Ava came in quietly and saw her sister resting, she climbed up on the chair and held the crayon picture beside the bed. "She's going to like it," Ava whispered. Keanu smiled. "She already does." Marisol reached over and smoothed Lilia's hair, then looked at Keanu. "She called you Dada," she said softly, "like she always knew." "She did," Keanu said. "She just waited for me to hear it." And in that quiet recovery room, as monitors blinked and rain started tapping softly against the windows, a new chapter of their family had already begun. The first night home was quiet, but not silent. Lilia breathed softly from her new bed in the corner of Ava's room, wrapped in a pink blanket with silver stars. Keanu peeked in every hour, afraid he might wake her, but needing to know she was still okay. Ava insisted they share a room, at least until Lilia felt safe. She'd even drawn another picture. This one had a house with 4 stick figures: Keanu, Marisol, Ava, and Lilia. Over their heads floated a massive yellow sun with rays that reached all corners of the page. In the living room, Keanu settled onto the couch with a blanket draped over his shoulders. He didn't fall asleep until the sky outside was turning purple. Lilia's recovery surprised even the doctors. Within days, her appetite returned, her energy rose, and she resumed her toddler chatter like nothing had happened. But it wasn't just her physical strength that caught attention. It was the way she moved through the world. At 20 months, she noticed things most children missed. One morning, Keanu walked into the kitchen to find Lilia fitting hexagon and triangle-shaped blocks into a wooden board meant for 4-year-olds. Her tiny fingers moved confidently, almost instinctively. When she finished, she clapped for herself, then looked up and said, "I did it, Daddy. I made the stars." Keanu crouched beside her. "You did? That's amazing, Lilia." She beamed and pointed to the final piece, a crescent moon slot she hadn't yet filled. "That one's hiding." Marisol, standing at the counter, smiled faintly. She talks like she's dreaming out loud. Later that afternoon, they visited the pediatrician for a follow-up. The doctor conducted a short series of developmental tests and then sat back, eyebrows raised. "She's not just recovering well," the doctor said. "Her language, spatial reasoning, and memory recall are years ahead of average. I wouldn't say she's gifted, I'd say she's extraordinary." Keanu sat quietly with Lilia in his lap, her small hand curled around one of his fingers. Marisol didn't speak until they were back in the car. "It's like she came into this world knowing things," she said softly. "Even before she could talk, she'd stare at people like she was reading them." Keanu nodded. "She's always felt older than her age." That night, As the girls slept side by side in their shared room, Keanu stood in the doorway, watching them. Ava had her arm protectively over Lilia. The younger girl stirred in her sleep and nestled closer. He exhaled slowly, overwhelmed by a feeling he hadn't expected: wonder. The next morning, Keanu woke to the sound of giggles echoing down the hallway. He shuffled out of bed, still in a t-shirt and flannel pants, and found both girls on the floor in the living room, surrounded by crayons and papers. Ava was drawing suns with sunglasses. Lilia was coloring inside the lines with quiet focus, her tongue slightly poking out. "She woke me up and said it was time to make a surprise," Ava said proudly. Keanu knelt beside them and noticed what Lilia was working on. It wasn't a typical toddler doodle. It was a house, complete with windows, a chimney, and a tree beside it. The proportions weren't perfect, but for a child who wasn't yet 2, it was astonishing. "Even wrote her name," Ava added. In the corner of the paper, shaky but legible, were the letters L-I-L-I-A. Keanu looked at Marisol, who was watching quietly from the kitchen doorway. "She taught herself the alphabet," she said. "I caught her pointing at letters in one of Ava's old books and sounding them out. She connects things fast, too fast sometimes." Later that day, Marisol and Keanu sat on the back porch with mugs of tea. The air was still, filled only with the faint hum of birds and the occasional laughter drifting from inside the house. "She's not just smart," Marisol said, watching the sky. "She sees everything, feels everything." Keanu turned to her, his expression soft. "I see it too. And it scares me." Marisol nodded. "I think that's why I didn't tell you. I knew if you saw her, really saw her, you'd fall so hard you'd never come back up. And I wasn't ready for what that would mean for either of us." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you regret it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the shadows shifting through the trees. "I regret the time she didn't get with you. I regret the nights she asked why the Skyman never came down to say goodnight," her voice cracked. "But I don't regret loving her in secret. I did what I thought would protect her." Keanu nodded slowly, his jaw tightening with emotion. "She's a miracle. Even the way she fights through what happened at the hospital. She just adapts." They fell into silence, watching Ava and Lilia run barefoot across the yard. Lilia tripped on a branch, but before anyone could react, Ava helped her up and dusted off her knees. The younger girl didn't cry. She just gave Ava a big hug, then took off running again. "They're going to do something incredible," Keanu said under his breath. Marisol looked at him. "She already has?" That night, Keanu tucked both girls into bed. Ava rolled over instantly and was asleep within minutes. Lilia clutched her moon-shaped plushie and looked up at him. "Dada," she whispered. "Can we fly one day?" He smiled through a lump in his throat. "Yes, baby girl. One day we'll fly." She reached for his hand. He held it gently until her eyes fluttered closed. In the hallway, Marisol waited with a blanket folded in her arms. They didn't speak as he approached. Words weren't needed. For the first time in years, the house felt whole. Keanu walked to the living room window, staring out into the soft glow of the streetlights. His thoughts were still tangled, questions unanswered, a future uncertain. But one thing was suddenly, solidly clear. He had a family, and this time, he wouldn't lose them. The days following Lilia's surgery passed in a blur of cautious relief and quiet routine. Though her energy returned faster than anyone expected, her doctors remained firm. Lilia's condition would require lifelong monitoring. Every 3 months, they said. Detailed scans, heart rhythm checks, neurological assessments. It wasn't just about what had been fixed. It was about what might still emerge. Keanu sat in a private consultation room with Dr. Esposito, a leading pediatric cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai. Charts lined the table, along with digital scans of Lilia's heart. The doctor pointed to areas highlighted in soft red. "This," he said gently, "is why we stay vigilant. The surgery was a success, but her heart is unique. She'll need consistency, predictability. Stress and sudden environmental changes could aggravate latent issues." Keanu nodded, his jaw set. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was resolute. Back home, he watched Marisol packing a small overnight bag. Her movements were slow, hesitant. She folded one of Lilia's sweaters and placed it inside. The way her fingers lingered on the fabric made his chest ache. "You don't have to go," Keanu said quietly from the doorway. Marisol turned. "I just thought, maybe we should give you space again. This was never supposed to go this far. You have a life, Keanu." He stepped forward. "She needs both of us now. That means you don't go." Marisol looked down. "It's not just about space. I'm scared of losing her, of losing myself in this world you live in, the cameras, the pressure." I raised her quietly, away from all that. Keanu's voice stayed gentle. "You're not losing her. We're gaining each other." She glanced up, her eyes glossy. "And if one day it's your decision against mine?" "It won't be," he replied, "because everything we do will be for her. Together." Later that evening, Keanu sat at his desk with Lilia napping nearby. Papers were spread out before him. Legal documents, custody declarations, parental rights forms. His lawyer had prepared everything carefully. No drama, no spotlight, just the necessary steps to make it official. He didn't want to fight Marisol. He didn't want division. He wanted recognition for Lilia, for himself, for the unspoken bond that had already been there since that first night on Zuma Beach. He took a deep breath and signed the first page. Then the next, and the next. The next morning, Marisol found the stack of legal papers placed gently on the kitchen table. A yellow sticky note sat on top in Keanu's handwriting. "This isn't about control, it's about love and commitment. For her, for you, for us." She stood there for a long moment, one hand on the back of the chair, her eyes skimming over the bold title, "Petition for Joint Custody and Legal Recognition of Paternity." Her throat tightened. It wasn't that she doubted Keanu's love. She had felt it that night on the beach, in the hospital, in the quiet hours of recovery when he sat by Lilia's bedside and whispered stories about the stars. She had seen it in the way he held Lilia, in how he spoke to Ava about sisters and promises. But something in her heart still clung to fear. Fear that their lives would be swallowed by the spotlight. Fear of losing the quiet, grounded life she had tried so hard to build. That afternoon, she took Lilia out to the backyard, while Keanu played guitar on the porch. Ava sat cross-legged nearby, drawing again. The two little girls had started calling each other Sunshine and Moonshine, based on the necklaces Marisol had made them from clay and ribbon. They wore them proudly, their laughter echoing across the garden like music. Keanu's gaze shifted toward Marisol. She looked different out here, more relaxed. Her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, a gentle smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as she helped Lilia scoop ladybugs into a mason jar. "You're really staying," Keanu said softly. She looked up at him, unsure how to answer at first. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I want to believe in this, in you, in us." He set his guitar down and came closer. "Then let's believe in it together," he said. "No cameras, no press, no red carpets, just the three of us." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "You're not just the man I once worked for, Keanu. You're the father of my daughter, and you've become something more." He nodded. "Then let's make it real." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a pen. "I haven't signed anything yet," she said, holding it up. He blinked. "You kept the papers? They've been in my purse since this morning." She stepped back into the house, returning with the stack. Carefully, she sat at the table. Lilia toddled in behind her, clutching Ava's hand. "What are you doing, Mama?" Lilia asked, her voice high and curious. Marisol looked up at Keanu, then back at her daughter. "I'm saying yes," she said. She picked up the pen and, hand trembling just slightly, signed her name. When it was done, she looked up. Keanu didn't speak. He simply exhaled, as if letting go of a weight he'd carried for months, maybe years. That night, the house was quieter than usual. The girls fell asleep early, curled up in the same bed, their hands linked between pillows. Keanu and Marisol sat by the fireplace. No TV, no music, just firelight and the soft ticking of the old wooden clock above the mantel. "I've spent most of my life unsure about family," Keanu said. "Where it begins, where it ends, what makes it real." Marisol leaned in. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now, I think it's moments like this, where fear gets smaller than love, and love becomes the only thing that matters." She rested her head on his shoulder, silent. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of lavender and early autumn. Inside, something new had begun. A quiet promise, as a shared home, and a second chance neither of them had expected, but both had chosen. The morning sunlight filtered through the olive trees that lined Keanu's backyard, dappling the grass with soft golden patches. It was quiet, except for the gentle sound of wind chimes and the distant laughter of two little girls. Lilia and Ava were sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket, hunched over a stack of storybooks, their heads nearly touching. From a distance, they could have passed for twins separated by a few years. Same dark hair, same soft gaze, the same unspoken bond that had bloomed almost overnight. It had only been 2 weeks since Keanu made the decision that changed everything. After months of hesitation and endless questions, Marisol and Lilia had moved into the guest house, something Keanu had quietly renovated to be more than just a spare living space. He'd filled it with warmth, color, and little touches meant just for them. A hand-painted mural of stars and birds stretched across the nursery wall. A shelf filled with bilingual children's books stood beside a reading nook. There were pictures, too, of Ava, of Lilia, and even of Marisol, in moments captured without her knowing, preserved like fragments of a truth he had once been blind to. For Marisol, the transition hadn't been easy. She still kept to herself more than Keanu liked. She insisted on doing her own shopping, paying for some of Lilia's clothing herself, and always checking before she cooked in the main kitchen. But slowly, the walls had started to come down. She joined them for breakfast on the weekends, helped Ava with school projects, and stayed up after Lilia's bedtime to drink herbal tea on the porch while Keanu read scripts under the dim patio lights. Keanu, too, was changing. He turned down 3 major projects in a row. His agent was stunned. Producers begged him to reconsider, but Keanu stood firm. His time was no longer his alone. He began measuring the value of a day not in headlines or paychecks, but in giggles echoing down the hallway and tiny socks left in the laundry, and toddler questions his nights with lullabies sung off-key, and whispered stories about space and stars. Sometimes, while brushing Lilia's hair after bath time, Keanu would stare at her in the mirror and see something that took his breath away. Not just Ava's eyes or her mother's dimples, but a spark, a knowing, as if she had come into the world already aware of the pain he'd carried and chosen to bring healing instead. One afternoon, Keanu sat cross-legged on the rug in the living room, surrounded by scattered crayons, puzzle pieces, and the remains of a half-built Lego castle. Lilia was on his lap, babbling about how the blue bricks were for the Sky Tower, while Ava sorted through colors and bossily instructed them both on how it should really go. Marisol leaned against the door frame, arms crossed loosely, smiling at the sight. She wore a soft blue sweater and jeans, her dark hair tied back in a braid. It was the kind of moment she used to witness from a distance when Keanu was only her employer and Ava was a little girl needing constant care. Now, Marisol stood there, watching her daughter nestled in the lap of her father, building dreams out of plastic blocks and shared laughter. Keanu caught her gaze and patted the carpet beside them. "We've got plenty of blue bricks left," he said with a crooked smile. Marisol hesitated, then joined them. Lilia clapped when her mother sat down, offering her a yellow brick with a toothy grin. "Mama, help!" And just like that, there were 4 people on the floor, tangled in imagination, surrounded by the kind of chaos that no longer felt messy, but meaningful. That evening, after the girls were tucked in, Ava with a stuffed owl, and Lilia curled around a glow-in-the-dark star pillow, Keanu and Marisol sat on the back steps of the house. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and somewhere in the neighborhood, a wind chime sang faintly. "He really calls me that?" Keanu asked. Marisol nodded, sipping her tea. "The Sky Man. She says you have stars in your hands." He chuckled, but there was a heaviness in his voice. "I don't know where she gets that." Marisol looked down at her cup, then at him. "You hold her like she's the most precious thing on earth. That's why." Keanu stared ahead into the darkened yard, listening to the soft hum of the night. "Sometimes I wonder how many years I lost. What I could have done better if I'd known." "You didn't lose them," she said softly. "She's here now, and she's loved. That's what matters." He nodded, throat tightening. "I just don't want to miss another minute." Marisol didn't answer, but her hand gently reached over and rested on his. It stayed there. The next morning, Lilia ran barefoot down the hallway in dinosaur pajamas, clutching a stuffed giraffe and yelling, "Skyman! Skyman!" Keanu was pouring cereal. He turned just in time to catch her as she launched into his arms. She giggled, then rested her head on his shoulder. "Gerald." Ava followed, still sleepy-eyed, rubbing her face and frowning. "She always wakes up before me." Keanu smiled and kissed the top of her head. "That's because she thinks she's racing the sun." They all sat at the breakfast table, milk cartons, fruit slices, and sticky fingers, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the unanswered questions, just the present. A kitchen full of morning light and a new kind of peace. Later that week, Keanu found himself in his home office, thumbing through a portfolio his agent had dropped off. A new role, big budget, lots of buzz. He stared at it for a while, then gently closed the folder. Outside the window, Ava was teaching Lilia how to hula hoop. They both kept falling down laughing, tangled up in plastic rings and ponytails. Marisol was watching from the porch swing, a book in her lap, her eyes dancing with joy. Keanu leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "This is the best role I've ever had." That night, after bath time, he was rocking Lilia to sleep in the nursery. She was almost dozing off when she opened her eyes and whispered, "You're my Sky Man." Keanu felt something crack wide open in his chest. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "And you," he whispered, "are my little star." The ballroom at the Beverly Wilshire was filled with soft murmurs and clinking glasses, guests dressed in elegant black ties and shimmering gowns. It was the annual Child First Foundation fundraiser, a prestigious event aimed at raising money for children's health and protection services across California. But this year, the energy in the room felt different. Warmer, quieter. A deeper anticipation hung in the air. Toward the back of the room, Keanu stood alone behind the velvet curtain, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand. He wasn't nervous about the crowd. He'd stood before audiences of thousands, performed stunts, delivered monologues, faced cameras that never blinked. But this was different. This speech wasn't scripted. It wasn't a performance. It was his truth. Out in the crowd, Marisol sat at a reserved table near the front, her hands lightly resting on Lilia's shoulders. Ava sat beside them, wearing a navy dress with silver sparkles and a headband she insisted made her look like a star princess. Marisol leaned in, whispering something in Lilia's ear that made the little girl giggle. A host walked onto the stage, tapped the mic, and introduced Keanu. The applause began before his name was even fully said. He stepped out slowly, head slightly bowed, the way he always did, humble, quiet. As he reached the microphone, he unfolded the paper, glanced down at it, then folded it back up and tucked it into his coat pocket. He looked out over the crowd, then down to the front row. Ava smiled up at him, mouth stuffed with a dinner roll. Lilia waved, her tiny hand just visible above the tablecloth. Marisol's eyes met his, and in them he found steady calm. He took a breath and began. I've been asked to speak tonight about children, about their needs, their futures, their safety, and I will. But first, I want to speak about something I only recently came to understand. He paused. The room grew still. I've lived a life surrounded by cameras, fame, sets, and stories that aren't real. But a little over a year ago, something happened that changed everything. It didn't come with a headline, no script, no spotlight, just a single moment in an airport. He smiled gently. I saw a child, just a little girl, and something inside me shifted. I didn't know who she was at first, but I felt something familiar, like a thread pulling through time. He stopped again, letting the silence breathe. Keanu's voice dropped to a softer tone, and the crowd leaned in, quiet and attentive. I won't name names tonight. Some things are meant to stay sacred. But I want to tell you a story that's been unfolding in my life. One that taught me what it really means to be a father. He looked down for a second, then slowly back up. Years ago, I lost someone close to me, and in the shadow of that grief, I found purpose in raising a beautiful little girl named Ava. We created our own kind of peace, together. But healing is never finished. Sometimes life circles back and taps you on the shoulder when you least expect it. He took a deep breath. That moment for me came when I discovered that someone I trusted, someone I once leaned on in my darkest days, had been holding a secret, not out of malice, but out of fear, out of love. She had been raising a child, my child, quietly, alone. There was a hush across the room. No one shifted, no one blinked. I didn't find out through a phone call or a letter. It wasn't a headline or an announcement. It was a moment, a glance, a small face in a crowd that felt like a reflection. He smiled, remembering the gala, remembering Lilia's eyes. That little girl, she changed everything. He paused again, this time letting his eyes rest on Marisol, then Ava, then Lilia. I was angry at first, hurt. I had questions that might never be fully answered. But then I saw her. I really saw her, and none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that this child, this brilliant, brave, beautiful little girl, was here, and she needed someone to step up. Not just show up, step up. He gripped the edges of the podium, steady but emotional. She had a medical emergency not long after I met her, a heart condition that went unnoticed until one terrifying night. I carried her into the ER myself, praying harder than I ever have in my life. That night, I realized something. We're never guaranteed more time with the people we love. We only have now, and I wasn't going to waste another second. Several audience members wiped their eyes. A woman near the center dabbed at her mascara with a cloth napkin. The only sound was Keanu's voice, steady and stripped down. So I made a choice. I brought her home. I brought her and her mother into our lives. I renovated a space for them, not out of guilt, but because I wanted to. Because family is what you choose to protect. It's who you show up for when no one's watching. He turned slightly toward Marisol, who had gone still, her eyes glassy. Lilia, too young to understand the gravity of the words, tapped her sippy cup softly against her plate, swaying slightly in her booster seat. Ava leaned on her elbow, smiling with a mix of pride and awe. People ask me sometimes why I stay quiet, why I don't speak more. But here's the truth. Some stories are too sacred to share. Some moments are too personal to turn into sound bites. But tonight, I wanted to share this story not to shock you or to impress you, but to remind you of something. He paused again, then, his voice even lower. Sometimes, the thing we've been looking for most in life is already right in our arms. A silence filled the ballroom, a deep, soul-level quiet. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause, not thunderous or performative, but warm, reverent, rising like a wave of gratitude. As Keanu stepped back from the microphone, he walked off the stage, not to a spotlight or a press line, but straight to his table. Lilia reached out both hands to him. Ava moved her chair so he could sit between them. Marisol slid her hand onto his. There were no more words spoken. There didn't need to be. The months that followed moved quietly, like the slow turn of pages in a cherished book. Lilia's strength returned faster than the doctors had predicted. With regular checkups, adjusted nutrition, and a home full of attention and care, she blossomed. Her laughter returned. Her appetite grew. Her questions, curious, unfiltered, and relentless, became a constant background to every room she walked into. Ava, once hesitant, now proudly referred to Lilia as my little mirror. She helped her brush her hair in the mornings, shared her coloring books, and even gave up her favorite teddy bear without being asked. They had a rhythm now, a closeness that felt as if it had always been there, as if they'd simply been waiting to find each other. Keanu watched them often from the kitchen doorway, leaning on the frame with a quiet smile. To him, it felt like a home that had always existed in his dreams, but was now taking shape in the real world. Marisol had moved into the guest house with Lilia, just as planned. It had a wraparound porch, a bright yellow door, and white curtains that fluttered like sails when the breeze came through the windows. She kept it simple. Photos of her daughter on the shelves, a small bookshelf, a tiny corner for her sketching and journaling. But most evenings they were all together in the main house, sharing meals, folding laundry, picking movies. It didn't feel like two households, it felt like one. And yet, through all of it, there was still something unspoken between Keanu and Marisol, something hovering gently in the space between their glances, their quiet laughs, their shared efforts. They co-parented with surprising ease. There was no tension, no confusion over boundaries. It was seamless. She knew when he needed quiet after filming. He knew when she needed a moment to herself after chasing two girls under 5 around the living room. They moved around each other like two halves of the same intention, but the silence between them began to carry weight. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep, Lilia curled beside Ava like a shadow, their foreheads nearly touching. Keanu stepped out onto the back porch. Marisol was already there, wrapped in a throw blanket, her eyes on the sky. He sat beside her without a word. The stars were faint that night, but the hush of the garden and the soft hum of the night air filled the space where words might have gone. Keanu took a slow breath, then broke the silence. "I don't just want to be her father," he said, his voice low. "I want to build a life with both of you." Marisol's eyes filled immediately. She didn't look at him right away. She kept them trained on the stars, blinking fast. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she turned. Her lips trembled, but she smiled. "Then let's start." It wasn't a declaration wrapped in passion. It wasn't the beginning of some grand cinematic romance. It was something quieter, something stronger. It was the kind of beginning two people choose when they've both already been broken before. And now, they're choosing each other not in fantasy, but in truth. From that night on, something shifted. The next morning, Marisol came over early. Earlier than usual, with no announcement, no ceremony. She brewed coffee in Keanu's kitchen as if she'd been doing it for years. He kissed the top of her head as he passed by, almost instinctively, and she didn't flinch. She smiled. Lilia woke up giggling in the big house, and Ava leapt from her bed to race toward the sound. A family of 4. Weekends were filled with hikes, library trips, sandbox picnics. Marisol, once fiercely independent, allowed herself to rest. Keanu, once always on the move, slowed down and let life teach him its gentler rhythms. Professionally, Keanu kept working, but with more intention. He chose projects that wouldn't take him too far or too long. He turned down action blockbusters and leaned into quieter films. Stories about family, redemption, and second chances. In every interview, he looked more grounded. Journalists began noticing the change, the stillness in his tone, the warmth in his words, the undeniable shift in his center of gravity. They didn't know it, but that center had a name. 2 names, really. Ava and Lilia. And a woman who had once run from the possibility of being loved, but had now chosen to stay. One afternoon, as spring bloomed early across the hills of Los Angeles, Marisol found Keanu sitting beneath the lemon tree in the backyard. Lilia was in his lap, babbling about bugs and leaves, while Ava tried to teach her how to braid grass into bracelets. Marisol watched them for a long time before joining. "I've been thinking," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear, "about the kind of mother I want to be, the kind of woman I want to be." Keanu looked up, his eyes gentle. "I want to be the kind who stays," she whispered. He reached for her hand. "You already are." And just like that, the last sliver of fear inside her heart, the one that had whispered that all of this was too good, too fragile, quieted for good. Later that evening, while tucking Lilia into bed, Keanu noticed something on her nightstand. A drawing, crayons on construction paper. It showed a house with a red roof, a man, a woman, and 2 girls holding hands under a big blue sky. Lilia had written, in her uneven toddler scrawl, Lilia had written, "My family." Keanu sat on the edge of her bed and watched her sleep for a while. And for the first time in a very long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything he'd lost, every silence he'd endured, every unanswered prayer had been leading here. Not to a mansion, not to applause, but to this tiny room with the smell of baby lotion and crayon wax and the rise and fall of a little girl's breathing. A little girl who once called him Sky Man. Now she simply called him Dad. The late afternoon light poured softly over the yard, golden and warm, like a memory you want to hold forever. In the middle of it all, a cardboard rocket stood proudly. Ava and Lilia had spent hours constructing it with scissors, glue, old cereal boxes, and strips of colored tape. On its side, Lilia had scribbled the words, "To the moon and back," in thick green marker. It wobbled slightly in the breeze, its wings crooked, its nose bent, but to them it was perfect. Ava crouched beside it with a clipboard, acting as mission control. She wore Keanu's old sunglasses and a scarf tied around her head like a bandana. Lilia sat inside the makeshift ship with a colander on her head and a plastic spatula as her steering stick. Keanu and Marisol watched from the porch swing, their hands loosely intertwined, coffee cups forgotten beside them. The house behind them felt lived in now, the way a home should. Toys were scattered across the grass, laughter echoed. Somewhere inside, the kitchen still smelled like the banana muffins the girls had helped bake earlier. Marisol leaned her head gently against Keanu's shoulder. He looked down at her and smiled. "You know," he said, voice low, "we didn't find each other by accident." She turned her head, eyes warm. "No, we didn't." He squeezed her hand. "I think everything before this, all the pain, the detours, it was leading us here." Marisol's fingers tightened slightly in his. "To cardboard rockets and glitter stars, and quiet mornings, and messy dinners. And this." Lilia popped her head out of the rocket, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Ready for launch," she shouted. Keanu stood up slowly, his body still stiff from yesterday's workout. He walked to the cardboard rocket and knelt beside her. "Are you sure everything's ready?" he asked in a playful tone. Lilia nodded seriously. "Ava says we got enough fuel to reach Saturn." Keanu tapped the side of the rocket twice. "Then let's fly." He stepped back, and Ava began the countdown. 5, 4, 3. Lilia pressed her hands against the side of the rocket and closed her eyes. 2. Keanu watched her face. The concentration, the wonder, the absolute belief that she could go anywhere. Blast off. The rocket didn't move, but in her world it soared. He turned to Marisol again. She was watching, smiling through the quiet tears that often came during the simplest moments now. Not from sadness, from fullness. He joined her on the porch once more and sat down beside her, not saying anything for a while. Then, finally, he whispered, "I never knew what it meant to belong somewhere." She took a breath and answered just as softly, "Now you do." He nodded. They didn't need to say more, because sometimes the universe gives us second chances, not always in the form of grand gestures or movie moments. Sometimes it shows up in the form of small hands gripping glitter glue, soft voices saying "Dada" through sleepy smiles, and the courage to stay when it would be easier to run. And sometimes love doesn't arrive in a straight line. It drifts in, late, unsure, wrapped in silence and mystery. But if you wait long enough, love always finds its way home. Later that evening, after the sun dipped below the trees and the stars peeked through the darkening sky, Keanu walked through the quiet house. Ava and Lilia had fallen asleep, curled next to each other on the couch, a blanket draped over them, the glow of a space-themed movie flickering across their peaceful faces. He paused to take it in, the serenity, the stillness, the sound of gentle breathing that filled the room like music. Marisol stood beside him, her arms folded lightly. She whispered, "They're becoming inseparable." "They're sisters," Keanu said, "the kind who hold hands in the dark, the kind who'll never let each other fall." Marisol leaned her head against his arm. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." "I know, me neither." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from Ava's forehead, then tucked the blanket higher over Lilia's shoulders. Both girls stirred slightly, but didn't wake. In the hush of that moment, he felt the full weight of fatherhood, not just as a title, but as a calling. Later, he stepped out onto the back porch again while Marisol made tea. The sky above was scattered with stars, and the moon hung low and golden. The cardboard rocket still sat on the grass, now tilted, one wing flopped down, but still proudly standing. He sat on the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees, and thought about everything that had brought him here. The uncertainty, the heartbreak, the sudden twist of fate that turned a quiet flight into a life-changing discovery, and the tiny voice that had called him Dada for the first time and rewired his soul. Behind him, Marisol returned and handed him a warm mug. They sat in silence for a while. "You know," she said gently, "I used to be terrified that one day you'd find out, and it would ruin everything." Keanu looked at her, his voice calm. "But it didn't. It built something better." She nodded, her eyes glassy. "It took me a long time to believe we deserved that. You do. Lilia does. And Ava, she was the one who kept me steady when I didn't even realize I was lost." He paused, turning his gaze toward the sky again. "I think this was the life I was meant for. Not the spotlight, not the applause. This." Marisol reached for his hand again. This time, she didn't let go. In the months to come, there would still be challenges. Checkups, parenting disagreements, career sacrifices, but none of that would shake what had been quietly built from the inside out. Ava would draw a picture for her school project titled "My Family," and in it she would sketch 4 stick figures under a rainbow. Too tall, too small. She'd label them with tiny hearts next to each name. When her teacher asked what made her family special, she'd answer without hesitation, "Because we love, even when it's hard." Keanu would find that picture later, tacked to the fridge, and stare at it for a long time. Sometimes, life gives you a second act. Sometimes, it gives you a second home. And sometimes, it hands you the truth not in thunder, but in whispers. To everyone watching this incredible story unfold, if this touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Maybe you've experienced something like this. A reunion, a revelation, a reminder that love still matters. Or maybe, like Keanu, you believe that love isn't something you find, it's something that finds you. Because love always finds its way home. And when it does, you'll know. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.